Check my phone again on the drive back from the airport. No missed calls, no texts. 7 years of marriage and my wife couldn't be bothered to reply to a single message in 3 days. I told myself it was nothing. She got busy. She always got busy when I was away for work. That's what I told myself the whole 40-minute ride home, sitting in the back of that Uber with my laptop bag between my feet and a knot in my chest that I couldn't explain. My name is Marcus. I'm a structural engineer. I've spent most of my adult life traveling between job sites, filing reports, managing contractors I'll never see again. My wife, I'll call her my wife because that's what she was for 7 years, was a physical therapist. Steady hours, good income, always home by 6. We had a good life. I thought we had a good life. Her name was Renee. The first sign wasn't dramatic. I want to be clear about that because people always expect the story to start with something obvious. Lipstick on a collar, a strange car in the driveway. It wasn't like that. It started with a receipt. I was going to our joint checking account online, something I did every couple of weeks to make sure our contractor payments clear correctly. And I noticed a Venmo transfer. $250, sent to an account I didn't recognize. The display name was just initials. I assumed it was a friend thing, a girl's trip fund, or a birthday dinner she'd organized. I mentioned it casually over dinner that night. She didn't miss a beat. She said it was for a baby shower at work, that she'd collected from a few colleagues and sent the total to whoever was buying the gift. Completely reasonable. I nodded and forgot about it. Except there was another one 2 weeks later. Then another one after that. I didn't say anything the second or third time. Something made me wait. I'm not sure I can explain it exactly. It was less like suspicion and more like a quiet feeling I couldn't shake. The way you know a bridge is wrong before you can calculate exactly why. I've been an engineer long enough to trust that instinct. I had a 6-week project coming up in Charlotte, a commercial complex, new build. My firm had been awarded the contract the previous spring, and I'd been the lead since day one. I was going to be gone most of Monday through Thursday for the better part of a month and a half. I told Renee about the schedule over breakfast one Saturday. She nodded, said she'd miss me, and went back to her coffee. She didn't look up from her mug when she said it. I started paying closer attention after that. Nothing aggressive, nothing I'm proud of, just watching. The way she positioned her phone face down whenever I walked into the room, the way she'd wait until I was in the shower to make calls. The way she laughed at something on her screen and then set it down before I could see. Small things. Things you can explain away individually. Things that add up. The week before I left for Charlotte, I called the private investigator. His name was Arthur, referred to me by a colleague who'd gone through a divorce 2 years earlier and said Arthur had been worth every dollar. I told him I wasn't sure about anything, that I might be wrong, that I hoped I was wrong. He said that was what everyone told him. Arthur suggested a few things. A location sharing app on Renee's phone, which I installed one morning while she was in the shower. A small audio recorder placed in the pocket of a tote bag she kept by the front door, the one she grabbed whenever she ran errands. He also told me to write down anything unusual I'd already noticed, dates, amounts, anything specific, so we'd have a baseline. I wrote down the Venmo transfers, all 6 of them, the same initials each time. I drove to Charlotte on a Sunday night, called Renee from my hotel like I always did. She sounded happy to hear from me, asked about the drive, told me the neighbor's dog had gotten into our garbage again. Normal. Warm. Nothing off at all. I hung up and sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time. Arthur contacted me Wednesday, not with a phone call, an email, just 2 sentences. Her car was at 4417 Pembroke Court from 8 p.m. Tuesday to 6 a.m. Wednesday. I have photographs. Call me when you're ready. I wasn't ready, but I called him anyway. He walked me through it carefully, which I appreciated. He didn't sensationalize anything. He said Renee had driven to that address Tuesday evening. He said the house belonged to a man named Owen. He was 43, divorced, and worked in medical device sales. He and Renee had apparently overlapped professionally years ago, back when she worked at a different clinic. I asked how many photographs there were. He said enough. He said I didn't have to look at them immediately. I said I needed to. He emailed them. I looked at them. And then I closed my laptop and went down to the hotel bar and ordered a bourbon I didn't drink and just sat there while the bartender pretended not to notice. She had been in that house all night. That was the part I kept coming back to. Not just dinner, not drinks, not some ambiguous scenario I could talk myself out of. All night. Arthur confirmed it again Thursday. Her car at the same address by 7 p.m. Still there when he drove past at midnight. I finished my week in Charlotte on autopilot. I got through 3 meetings and 2 site inspections and a long phone call with the general contractor about a rebar delay, and I have almost no memory of any of it. I flew home Friday evening. I didn't tell Renee what time my flight landed. I called a cab. The house was dark when I got there. Her car was in the driveway, which meant she was home. I let myself in quietly, left my bag by the door, and walked through the kitchen. There was a wine glass in the drying rack. 1 glass. She'd had company, or she'd had a quiet evening alone. I couldn't tell which. I sat down in the living room and waited. She came downstairs around 11, saw me in the chair, and genuinely startled. "You didn't tell me you were landing tonight," she said. "Wanted to surprise you," I said. Something moved across her face, very fast, gone before I could name it. She came and kissed me on the cheek and said she'd missed me and asked if I was hungry. I said I wasn't. I told her I wasn't feeling great, probably just exhaustion, and that I was going to sleep in the guest room so I didn't disturb her. She looked at me a moment longer than normal. "Are you sure everything's okay?" she asked. "Long week," I said. I lay in the guest room for 4 hours before I slept. Monday morning, I called an attorney. Her name was Patricia, a family law specialist who'd been recommended by the same colleague who'd pointed me to Arthur. I drove to her office during my lunch break and sat across from her desk and laid everything out. The Venmo transfers, the location data, Arthur's photographs. She was thorough and calm, and she did not pretend any of it wasn't what it was. She explained the process. We lived in a fault state, meaning documented infidelity could be used in divorce proceedings. She said with evidence like what Arthur had provided, we could pursue a favorable settlement. She said I should continue behaving normally, not confront Renee yet, not let on that anything had changed. I told her that was hard. She said it was always hard. I'd been managing a small team at my firm for about 4 years. The managing director, a man named Bernard, had been asking me to take on a senior partnership role for nearly 2 years. I'd kept putting him off, mostly because the role came with more travel, and I'd told myself that wasn't fair to Renee. Sitting in Patricia's office that afternoon, I thought about that. I'd turned down a promotion twice because I was trying to protect a marriage that my wife had decided didn't need protecting. I called Bernard from the parking garage before I drove back to the office. He picked up on the second ring. I said I was ready. He laughed and said it was about time. He said we'd work out the details over dinner that week. Bring my wife Rose, would love to meet her properly. I told him I'd be coming alone, that things were complicated at home, and I'd explain over drinks. He didn't push. I got home that evening and Renee was cooking. She'd made pasta, one of the things I actually loved, and the apartment smelled warm and ordinary. She poured me a glass of wine and asked about my day. I watched her move around the kitchen, and I thought about the photographs Arthur had sent me, and I felt something I still don't have a clean word for. Not rage. Closer to grief. Like watching something already dead that didn't know it yet. I told her work was fine. I complimented the pasta. I went to bed early and stared at the ceiling. The next 10 days were the strangest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I was polite and quiet, and I slept in the guest room every night, each time with a different excuse. Sinus headache, bad back, didn't want to wake her with my alarm. She accepted each one. Toward the end of that stretch, she seemed almost relieved not to be sharing the bed. That told me something too. Arthur was still watching. On the 8th day, he sent me a recording. Renee had used the tote bag with the recorder 2 days earlier. Most of it was noise, but there was one clear stretch, about 4 minutes, where she'd called Owen from her car. I listened to it once. Then I sent it to Patricia. In it, Renee told Owen that she thought I might know something. She said I'd been cold, distant, different than usual. Owen said I was probably just tired from travel, that I'd been overworking myself for years, which was rich coming from him. Renee said she didn't want to lose the house. Owen said she wasn't going to lose the house, that they just needed to be careful for a little while longer, that after the fall he'd have more flexibility. After the fall. I drove to Patricia's office the next morning. I handed her the recording. I told her I was ready to file. She said she'd have the paperwork prepared within 48 hours. I went back to work and asked to meet with Bernard that afternoon. I formally accepted the senior partnership. He shook my hand and told his assistant to clear his evening so we could celebrate properly. I called him from the elevator and said I appreciated it, but I needed a rain check, that I had something at home I needed to deal with. He said, without asking what it was, that whatever I needed to handle, I should handle it with everything I had. I went home. Renee was already there on the couch, half watching something on TV. I sat down across from her. She looked up, probably expecting the usual quiet evening, and saw something in my face that made her mute the television. I placed 2 envelopes on the coffee table. "What are those?" she said. "The one on the left," I said, "is a copy of the documentation I've given to my attorney. The one on the right is your copy of the divorce filing." She went very still. "I know about Owen," I said. "I know about 44117 Pembroke Court. I know about the 8 transfers. I have photographs and I have a recording of the conversation you had in your car last Tuesday." She opened her mouth once, closed it. "I'm not angry," I said, which wasn't entirely true, but anger wasn't the dominant thing. "I'm done. I want you to understand that this isn't a conversation about whether we can fix things. I don't believe we can, and I don't want to try." She started to cry. She said she was sorry. She said it hadn't meant anything, which is the thing people always say, as though that's supposed to help. She said she'd been lonely, that I was always traveling, that Owen had been there when she needed someone. I let her talk. I didn't argue with any of it. When she was finished, I said, "Patricia, my attorney, will be in contact with your attorney. The terms are laid out in that envelope. We split the shared accounts equally. I keep my pension, you keep yours. I want the car because I need it for work. You can have everything in the house that's yours. There's no reason this needs to be contentious." She looked at me and said, "Is there anything I can do?" I stood up. "You had 7 years," I said, "and you chose this." I went to the guest room and I sat on the edge of the bed and I felt, for the first time in weeks, like I could breathe. She didn't contest the filing. Patricia told me later that she'd expected a fight over the house contents or the shared savings, but Renee's attorney came back with minimal pushback. The process moved faster than I'd anticipated. Within 4 months, it was finalized. Owen, it turned out, had made the mistake of sending Renee a significant amount of money over several months. Beyond the Venmo transfers I'd found, there were additional payments through a shared account he'd apparently set up for what he called shared expenses. Patricia said this established a financial entanglement that opened him to a civil claim. She filed an alienation of affection suit on my behalf. His attorney called it frivolous. The judge did not agree. The hearing was unremarkable, except for one moment. Owen's attorney stood up and told the court that any claimed losses were speculative. The judge, a woman who had the particular patience of someone who had heard this exact argument many times before, looked at him over her reading glasses and said, "Counselor, your client spent 9 months deliberately conducting this affair while the plaintiff was traveling for work, supporting a household, and building a career. The financial and emotional damage is neither speculative nor minor." Owen was ordered to pay $43,000 in damages. It wasn't $1 million. It wasn't nothing. I put it toward a down payment on a condo. Bernard threw me into the deep end at work, which was exactly what I needed. Long hours, complicated projects, enough to keep my mind from doing what mimes do in empty apartments at 11 p.m. I started running again, something I'd stopped doing years ago because it cut into evenings at home. I signed up for a half marathon mostly to give myself a reason to get up before sunrise. I finished it in a time I wasn't embarrassed by. I didn't date for a long time. I wasn't interested. I felt, for most of that year, like someone who'd been in a car accident that hadn't been their fault. Technically intact, but needing to be careful about what I attempted. About 14 months after the divorce was finalized, Renee's mother called me. She was a woman I'd always respected, practical, direct. She'd never been the kind of mother-in-law who made things difficult. She called me on a Sunday afternoon and asked if she could have 20 minutes. I said, of course. She told me Renee had been diagnosed with a serious autoimmune condition. She'd been struggling for the past several months, fatigue and joint pain and a handful of other complications. She wasn't looking for sympathy from me, her mother said. She just wanted me to know. She also said that Renee had asked her to call, that Renee had something she'd wanted to say to me for a while and had been afraid to reach out directly. I said I'd speak with her. I drove over that next Saturday. Renee was in the living room of her mother's house, in a chair by the window. She looked different. Thinner, quieter. The kind of tired that doesn't lift. She didn't try to hug me. She just looked at me and said, "I wanted to tell you I was wrong. Not just about Owen. About all of it. You were a good husband, and I wasted it. And I have thought about that every day for the past year and a half." I sat down across from her. She said, "I'm not asking you to come back. I know that's not on the table. I just needed you to hear it from me." I stayed about an hour. We talked carefully, the way you talk when there's been damage on both sides of a conversation, even if it only started on one. Before I left, she said she hoped I'd find someone. She said she meant it. I believed her. 3 weeks later, I was working late, and one of the project coordinators on my team stopped by my office on her way out. Her name was Adrienne. She'd been with the firm for 2 years. Sharp, good under pressure, the kind of person who made every meeting faster by being in it. She knocked on the open door and said a group from the office was going for drinks and did I want to come because I'd been eating lunch at my desk for 3 weeks straight and it was starting to concern people. I laughed. I can't remember the last time something had made me laugh that naturally. I closed my laptop. I said I'd come for one drink. 2 hours later, I was still there. I'm not going to tie this up too neatly because that's not how it works, and I've had enough of stories that end with everything resolved. What I'll say is this. I spent a long time after my marriage ended asking myself what I'd missed, whether there were signs I should have caught sooner, whether I'd been too focused on work and too trusting at home. I've talked through most of that with a therapist, which was Bernard's suggestion and one of the better decisions I've made. What I've landed on is this. I wasn't perfect. No one is. But I was present, and I was faithful, and I did the right thing when the time came. Not by blowing anything up, not by making threats, but by documenting what was real, trusting the process, and walking away with my dignity. I am 41 years old. I have a job I'm proud of and a half-marathon medal on a hook by my front door, and a view of the city from my condo that I chose entirely for myself. And on some Saturday mornings, I have breakfast with Adrienne and she orders the same thing every time and has strong opinions about coffee roasts and makes me feel, more than anything else, like someone who has a lot of good years still ahead of him. That's enough. That's more than enough. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. They expect me to say the photographs or the recording or sitting across from Renee on the couch that night with 2 envelopes on the coffee table between us. But honestly, the hardest part was the 10 days in between. Knowing what I knew and still coming home. Still saying goodnight. Still sleeping under the same roof as someone who had decided, quietly and deliberately, that what we built together wasn't worth protecting. That stretch taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. There's a version of strength that looks like action, raising your voice, breaking things, making sure everyone in the room knows you've been wronged. And then there's the other kind, the kind that sits still, the kind that documents instead of reacts, that calls an attorney instead of a confrontation, that keeps its hands clean when every instinct is telling it to do something irreversible. I had to choose that second kind over and over again for 10 days straight, and I won't pretend it felt powerful in the moment. It felt like suffocating slowly. But it was the right choice, and the evidence of that is the outcome. Renee made her choices freely. Owen made his. Nobody forced either of them into anything, and when the consequences arrived, they arrived in proportion to exactly what had been done. The civil judgment wasn't a punishment I engineered. It was the natural result of what Owen chose to do over 9 months, documented, laid before a judge, and evaluated on its merits. That's how cause and effect actually works when you let it. You don't have to manufacture justice. You just have to be patient enough not to get in its way. What I wish I'd understood earlier is that intelligence in a crisis isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the calmest. It's about knowing when to talk and when to let Arthur do his job. It's about sitting across from Patricia and listening instead of performing. It's about accepting that you cannot control what another person does, only what you do in response. I got a promotion I'd been putting off for 2 years. I signed up for a half marathon. I found a therapist who helped me figure out which parts of the story were actually about me and which parts weren't. None of that was dramatic. All of it mattered. The resilience part is the part nobody warns you about, because it doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in 100 small decisions after the big one. The morning you go for a run when you don't want to. The evening you close your laptop and go for drinks with colleagues instead of eating at your desk alone again. The Saturday you had breakfast with someone who makes you feel like yourself, and you let yourself enjoy it without immediately building a wall around it. Recovery is not a finish line. It's just a series of days where you choose, again, to still be here and still be trying. I think about the 10 days sometimes. I think about how easy it would have been to blow everything up in the first 24 hours, to call Owen, to confront Renee before I had anything in hand, to let the anger make my decisions. I would have lost the leverage, the settlement, the judgment, possibly my own composure in ways that couldn't be undone. The discipline to wait wasn't cowardice. It was the most important thing I did, and I know that now because of how it ended, not with anyone destroyed, but with me on my own terms, with a life I actually chose. That's the part worth holding on to.